shoes on my feet started melting like butter off my feet.
If your body says no and you walk anyway, there's a very high chance you will be burned.
We're most famous for our program whereby people sign up to be frozen when they die. We take anybody.
Our investigation into cults gave us a rare glimpse into a world of dark and frightening secrets.
From the boundaries of the universe to the depths of your soul, embark on a journey through the unknown and unexplained as we explore mysteries, magic, and miracles. Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick McNee. Today, we'll see how to connect with your own higher self through an altered state of mind. And we'll take a different look at miracles, those that happen every day. But first, in any language, a ghost story is still a ghost story.
Our investigation into cults gave us a rare glimpse into a world of dark and frightening secrets.
On just an ordinary morning, a young woman did the most extraordinary thing. As flames engulfed her neighbor's home, she confronted the enraging inferno head-on, while 70% of her body was still covered with unhealed burns from her own inferno. It all started with a trip Ronell and Terry Wallace had planned to try to patch their broken marriage. With their own small aircraft, the world was their oyster. But with this trip, a little voice warned Ronell not to go.
The feeling came so strong that I literally started to pull a pad out from behind me and started to write out my last will and testament.
I begged her not to go, but for some reason she had the feeling that she had to go, that it was something that she had to do.
A heavy storm hit them. Things started getting out of control.
We saw a little dirt road, and he says, "That's it, Ronell, we're going to make an emergency landing on that dirt road."
After a very shaky landing, Ronell and Terry were just glad to put their feet on solid ground. Ronell refused to get back in the aircraft again. Being in a small, faraway town, Terry said they had no other option.
He says, "Ronell, there's an airport that's only 15 minutes by flight." He says, "What can happen in 15 minutes?"
Once in the air, Ronell could almost immediately see the dim outlines of the next town through the dense fog. She took a deep breath. They were going to make it after all.
Plane came into a mountain head-on, and we hit the mountain at 200 miles per hour. And parts of the plane started to fly everywhere. Sparks were coming up out of the plane. I saw a little cliff, and I knew that once we had nosed into the cliff, that it would be over. And just literally within moments of crashing into this large pile of rocks, we came to a dead halt. I was shocked. I said, "Oh my gosh, we just survived a plane crash." Because at that point, there was not a scratch or bruise on me. And then Terry started screaming, "Get out, get out!" I quickly started to undo my seatbelt. As I did, I noticed the shoes on my feet started melting like butter off my feet.
The fuel inside the aircraft met with the flames outside.
It just was an instant inferno. It felt like someone took a blowtorch, lit it, and it just inflamed right in your face. And then just then, as you see a strong muscular hand kind of like this, came out kind of from behind me like this. I just saw a little bit like that, and I just felt this. I just felt peace and tingling go from the center in both directions, and I felt I wasn't going to get hurt.
On the other side of the aircraft, Ronell was on fire.
The pain of the flames literally drove me down to my knees. I started to crawl across the wingtip as the flames were coming up along the side.
The drizzle finally doused the fire on Ronell's body.
As I sat on the rock, the smoke started to come up over my body, and there was a dead silence.
The aircraft was now only a pile of melting metal swallowed up in the blaze. Terry was nowhere in sight.
At that moment, I started to notice a movement inside the flame.
It was Terry, walking out of the flames towards Ronell.
As he came over to the end of the wingtip, he started to look in the fog, kind of bewildered. He said, "Ronell, Where's the man that pulled me out? I said, Terry, there was no man.
No one had seen or heard the crash. A grueling 5-mile hike down a mountain through a dense forest began. They didn't know where they were going. Eventually, a truck driver noticed the horrifying sight beside the road.
Well, for the first time, I saw myself in the mirror and I started to scream. My head was swollen out to the distance of my shoulder. My face was black and charred.
The physical and emotional pain overwhelmed Ronelle. Her body went into shock. She had a cardiac arrest.
And at the moment it became very black, I started to feel like my feet were going first into a very tight tunnel. And flashes of light started flashing by me at great speed.
What was characteristically like other near-death experiences, Ronelle also encountered a vision that would force her to cling to whatever life was left in her.
I moved into the path and I saw a young man coming toward me. He was tall and he was handsome.
This young man told Ronelle she had to return to Earth, that he needed her to be there in order for him to be born. Ronelle came back to life, but constantly hovered on the brink of death.
I think it's unimaginable to most of us. The hurt, the pain, they didn't think she would live.
But she did pull through, and just as miraculous, fate triumphed, and Ronelle and Terry's love reignited, saving their failing marriage. After months in the hospital, she could go home and see her 2 children again.
Coming home was probably the hardest moment that I think I can remember, because when I came home, I was wearing this mask.
Ronelle's mother prepared the children.
Probably one of the most traumatizing experiences that I had was when Jason first saw me. He grabbed my mom's leg and he started to shake. And he started to scream, and all I wanted to do was just put my arms around him and tell him it was going to be okay. And I said, Jason, I am your mom, and I do love you. And in the tears, he smiled, and he turned around, and he grabbed my neck, and he never did let go.
After hundreds of operations and skin grafts, Ronelle was finally on the road to a long and traumatic recovery. But one morning, months after the dreadful accident, Ronelle would face her biggest challenge yet.
I had just unwrapped all the wrappings off of my body, and they were on a pile on the floor, and Terry had just come out of the shower.
Terry noticed that the neighbor's house was on fire.
I ran to the front door. I started banging on it, and no one answered.
She ran inside the garage.
The smoke was very dense, and I started to choke.
Screaming was the only thing she could do to wake the family inside the burning house. Once everyone was safely outside, it was just a matter of minutes before the house collapsed. In the years that would follow, Ronelle would become a motivational speaker and receive numerous awards for her tremendous work with patients in burn units.
She's touched a lot of hearts and a lot of people, so that the experience has really turned into somewhat a positive thing. And to hear her speak makes me proud.
I look at her every day and just wonder, how she's still here.
Ronelle and Terry only had one more wish, to have more children.
They told me I'd never have kids again.
Once again, Ronelle beat the odds. But shortly before giving birth, she had another vision.
And as I was laying there on the bed, I saw an image of a young man standing next to me. And he said, "Thank you, Mom." And I said, "Thank you, Nathaniel." And that moment they came in, they turned me around, and I had my son.
I think that you should have admitted it, because I think if you take a 12-year-old to bed, you should admit and say that she's your wife.
So what we're doing when we firewalk is raising the energy in our own bodies to walk across the fire, to match the energy of the fire.
Most of us have at one time or another been mesmerized by something, temporarily. But in the case of cults, followers have let a select few exercise an almost uncanny control over them and devoutly attribute to their leader extraordinary, even supernatural powers. What is it about these men that set them apart? Is it a misuse of divine power that they actually possess? Or is it pure madness? And even more important, what is it about the followers? Everyday people from all walks of life, like you and me.
I first met Jennifer in 1985, and we went to the same high school together. She was great. She's one of the most popular people I've ever known, and people adored her and were really drawn to her. Her involvement with the Branch Davidians started with her sister Kathy. David Koresh would call Jennifer at home and could begin to make her promises of, we are a group that can help you spiritually, and you can find some of the answers through us.
April 19, 1992, only months later in Waco, Texas, a scene of horror and tragedy was carried live to the world. In a lethal blaze, more than 80 lives were lost, including 21 children under the age of 14.
Jennifer and her sister Kathy and Kathy's 14-month-old baby daughter, Chanel, all died in Waco.
The inner sanctum of the compound at Mount Carmel was finally exposed, and so was the bizarre life Koresh and his followers had led. Koresh claimed to be the second Messiah, sent before God's judgment upon the world to save mankind. And even after his death, Koresh's message lingers.
I have since met with some of the surviving members of the Branch Davidians who are still living in Waco and who very much still believe that David Koresh is coming back and are living their lives around that fact.
One such devout follower of Koresh is deadly serious in her conviction.
So when David comes back, and he is coming back, he will give the 7 seals. See, we were given the 7 seals.
Our investigation into cults gave us a rare glimpse into a world of dark and frightening secrets. But it's the leaders of these cults who intrigue us the most. People who possess an almost inexplicable power to seduce and conquer disciples by the thousands.
Hitler was by far one of the most successful cult leaders in that it became a totally social phenomenon that took over an entire country. He certainly had public appeal, and the kind of charisma that drew masses to him, and he certainly was manipulative and cunning and was able to get people to do horrendous things.
In the 1970s, the People's Temple in Redwood Valley was a tight-knit community, and their infamous leader, Jim Jones, appeared to be the answer to all their prayers. At his command, they packed their bags, took their children, and followed him to what seemed to be the promised land. But hometown families of the followers began to raise concern. It was all too good to be true. Congressman Leo Ryan decided to visit Jonestown and see for himself.
He had heard reports of all kinds of bizarre things going on, and I believe that among those things were reports of suicide drills.
In his efforts to help a few of Jones's followers escape Jonestown, Congressman Ryan was killed by Jones's snipers. Not long after that, a frantic Jim Jones forced his followers to carry out a grisly mass suicide pact.
913 people total died between those who committed suicide and those who were murdered.
I've been laying up here paying for your sins for 2,000 years.
Charles Manson was taking advantage of sort of the hippie flavor of the times and sort of doing, free love, free sex, dancing around in the woods naked, doing drugs. At the same time, he was able to gather these people around him and get them to accept his crazed version of the world and his reality, which came to be called Helter Skelter. And again, we had people who carried out extremely violent acts at his command.
In David Koresh's case, he started out, just being this man who had a little bit of truth that he wanted to share with people and was very sincere in that. And then pretty soon he was this prophet. And then as time went on, he began to claim he was the Lamb of God. And at the time of his death, he was absolutely claiming to be the Lamb of God. And his followers died believing that he was the Lamb of God.
Experts estimate that there are approximately 2,500 to 3,000 cults operating in the United States today. So most of those cults have leaders, and there are millions of people at any given time in the United States involved in what we call destructive cults that are being controlled by leaders that have the type of power that Jim Jones and Charles Manson and David Koresh had over their followers.
They talk about cults and they say their cults are dangerous, but all you ever actually see in the news is governments killing cults. You don't see cults killing anybody.
Amo Bishop Roden lives on the compound in Waco today. Although not a follower of David Koresh, she is a devoted Branch Davidian.
And I don't think when you come out and live in a religious community in a beautiful place out in the country, and you're away from crime, that you suddenly are overcome with this suicidal impulse. It hasn't happened to me, I promise.
Contrary to belief, cults are not limited to religion or a certain type of people. There are psychotherapy cults, New Age cults, self-improvement cults, Eastern meditation cults, even political cults. And if you thought it only happened to other people, crazed people, think again.
I spent about 10.5 years in a political cult that was located in the San Francisco Bay Area. All that it takes is being in a certain vulnerable moment in your life and then coming across someone whose pitch somehow appeals to you.
Marge Boynton knew members of People's Temple. There was the district attorney and the high school teacher.
If you were to meet them, very normal, nice people, educated.
It was just by luck that I didn't get involved in the Branch Davidian and the Branch Davidian movement, and Jennifer was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It absolutely could have been me or anyone else.
But emerging from obscurity with a plan to shake the world to its foundation are the leaders of these cults. And as we've witnessed, not people who would be ignored.
David Koresh was a superb preacher. I don't think he was, as he claimed, a prophet. He was charismatic. He was one of the most charismatic people around, and people worshipped him.
The reality is that he was an egomaniac. He was perfectly willing to have set up a structure where people were sexually and physically abused. He could spout Bible verses till, the morning come and the next day come and the next day come, and that way sort of mesmerize his followers.
David was a very unique person. I like to say that people understand that.
There are lots of mind control techniques used by the leaders, including sleep deprivation, hypnosis against their will, altering somebody's food, cutting them off from their families.
Jim Jones was one of the more controlling, violent, and paranoid of the cult leaders, and his cult was also, some might say, one of the most successful cults.
They thought he was a very dynamic leader. They definitely thought that he was a man of God. One gentleman told me that he thought that Jim Jones was Jesus Christ.
Most cult leaders have some sort of divine magnetism, and really what that means is that they are self-proclaimed messiahs or gurus.
I would suppose that Jim Jones had some divine magnetism.
Most cult leaders have a combination of an authoritarian personality, a certain amount of charisma, and then a character disorder that would be defined as psychopathy, meaning that they just don't operate in the world like the rest of us. They are basically social deviants.
It seems that when we learn about them, there's always some sort of sexual dominance. And Jim Jones, by reputation, certainly had that. He demanded sex from many of them. I've heard that he used sex as a form of blackmail.
I lived 3 miles away. I had no idea that David Koresh was having children with young girls.
One of the best ways to control someone is to control them sexually, because that goes to someone's deepest emotional core.
As far as committing crimes or hurting somebody else, even, abusing children, if they believe that that is what God wants them to do, God meaning the person who's standing right in front of them, they believe it's the right thing to do.
I do believe they had multiple wives. I think that he should have admitted it, because I think if you take a 12-year-old to bed, you should admit and say that she's your wife. I do think they were a little young.
The manipulation is so strong, and the fear of retribution by the cult leader, or the fear of eternal damnation, or whatever it might be that cult leader is trying to get you to believe, is very strong.
Psychologically, you truly believe that you can't go out the door, and that there's no other life outside the cult, and there's no other reality but the cult reality.
And the reality is, at Ranch Apocalyptic, Koresh's surviving followers are waiting for him to return and the world to end.
Well, I don't set dates, but when I see what's going on in the world, when I see how Babylon is increasing to become Great Babylon, then I know it's closer than I thought.
So that's one of the reasons that I'm digging up the tunnels, because if he's going to be resurrected, I want his escape routes to be in clear evidence. Anyone who's built as many escape routes as he did had no intention of dying there. And I just find it impossible to believe that he did.
Whether it is Koresh or some other so-called Messiah that ignites the next fire under the sleeping giant we call cults, rest assured, they will possess some kind of magnetism.
Divine magnetism. I think that is perhaps both angelic and satanic. Now, David Koresh certainly had the magnetism. And I'll leave it to you to decide where he's coming from.
If your body says no and you walk anyway, there's a very high chance you will be burned.
We're most famous for our program whereby people sign up to be frozen when they die. We take anybody.
Firewalkers have stumped scientists for centuries. How can a person walk across hot coals reaching 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit without burning their flesh off? Whether their skin is spared by chanting, meditation, or the grace of God, today the art of firewalking is practiced to a high degree.
Since the first spark, fire has been essential to our lives. Fire stands for power, but in order to conquer that power, we must first conquer our fears. Is firewalking a trick, or is it truly mind over matter? Firewalking has been practiced universally from ancient times until the present. In many cultures, the purpose is for healing, but firewalking is also used as a means of celebration, purification, and personal growth. Heather Ash, a firewalk instructor from Davis, California, claims firewalking has changed her life dramatically.
Firewalking is basically very simple. It's building a big fire, waiting a couple hours for it to burn down to get nice, good-sized coals, and then walking across it with bare feet.
Since firewalking came to the United States, it has become more and more popular. So why do people do it?
People are really searching for more meaning in their life and more spirit, and it makes you realize how much magic there is in the world in a lot of ways.
Finding your limits, then surpassing them, is what firewalking is all about. If you focus on fear, for example, you naturally draw fear into your life.
We really invite people to look at what it is they're afraid of. What's the worst thing that can happen to you when you walk across the fire? And then we say, okay, that's what you're afraid of, now let it go. And now let's focus on what you want in your life. What do you want to create?
You know, Heather, I think most people, when they think about firewalking, they honestly believe there's some kind of trick involved. You put something on the bottom of the feet. Is that true?
No, it's not. We basically have people take their shoes and socks off, and that's it. You just go straight from your shoes to the fire.
If you're walking and something clicks and you concentrate more on the fire and getting burned than what you should be, is there any out? What do you do at that point?
I say keep going, because once you've taken that first step, you've committed.
While this is burning down, you say get prepared. What are we going to do? Are we going to meditate or chant? Tell me what the procedure is here.
Well, normally if we were teaching a workshop, we'd be doing about 4 hours of preparation, everything from singing to lecturing. But tonight, since we've all walked before, we're just going to probably do a lot of internal work individually.
So Warren, are you a student? Are you a student walker? Is that what we call you?
This is my 3rd time that I've been to one, so I guess that makes me a student, yeah.
The other participants play a vital role in the firewalk. While you can do it alone, it is not recommended.
A lot of times what we'll do is we'll have drumming and we'll have chanting going on, and it's not something that you need at all, but it is really helpful to feel the support of the group.
Do you all feel ready? I mean, do you feel like you can do this tonight?
You know, it's always, you never know until the fire's raked out, until you stand in front of it. I never have any idea, and no matter, I mean, I've walked over 100 times and I still never know. Ooh, it's hot here. It's hot.
Warren, how are you feeling about this?
Pretty good so far.
Are you?
Pretty calm.
Are you going? Go, 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 go. He's going! Woo! Woo! What I believe is there is this energy in everything, and so what we're doing when we firewalk is raising the energy in our own bodies to walk across the fire, to match the energy of the fire. We've been told since we were really, really young that fire burns. And so to watch someone's bare feet walking across coals, your brain kind of goes, wait a minute, you can't do that. The main lesson with firewalking is to listen to your intuition. When people come to a firewalk, we tell them, you're not here to walk on fire, you're here to learn how to listen to your intuition. And if your intuition, if your body says yes, then you'll walk and you won't get burned. If your body says no and you walk anyway, there's a very high chance you will be burned.
I admit, I was skeptical up until the last minute, assuming there must be a trick involved. But I tried it myself, and look, the bottoms of our feet are all the proof you need.
Been told it's physically impossible to do this.
Yeah.
They say that seeing is believing, and maybe doing it makes it even more believable. Walking on fire is something I never thought anyone would do, let alone me, but once you do, you know that the power of the mind is an absolute unbelievable thing.
That is the billion-dollar question. Preserving your memories. There are about 10 people now working on my archives. When I come back, they'll pull me out of the frosty freeze and they'll thaw me out. I've got it so set up that my memories will be there.
We're most famous for our program whereby people sign up to be frozen when they die. We take anybody.
The world of science fiction and fantasy is filled with tales of people returning from the grave. Our story is not so much a tale about Frankenstein or mad scientists, but about people who have made a decision that upon death, they wish to undergo cryonic suspension with the hope of one day being revived.
Does the soul exist? Is there such a thing as reincarnation? Or when we die, do we simply cease to exist? Whether a viable solution or a desperate hope, cryonics offers a possible reprieve from death. The first question, what is cryonics?
Cryonics means taking people who have been labeled as dead by today's medical criteria and placing them in a circumstance where they won't change very further in liquid nitrogen at 320 below zero, holding them there until they can be looked at by doctors of the future who might, using different criteria, decide they're alive and repairable. The whole point of cryonics is not love of being frozen, it's love of staying alive.
People from all walks of life have expressed an interest in cryonics. Among the more famous is the noted 1960s activist and proponent of cipher culture, Dr. Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary first came to prominence in the early 1960s as a professor at Harvard who advocated the use of hallucinogenic drugs as a means to self-enlightenment. Leary was also involved in the civil rights and the peace movement. Timothy, why at this point in your life are you considering cryonics? Why are we sitting here talking today?
Because I found out in January that I had a cancer which is spreading through my body. So my days and nights and weeks and years are numbered. Cryonic is the only one right now. It's very primitive. It's extremely experimental. I don't think I will be brought back, but I'm going to do everything in my power using the science that's available to study this issue so that in the future, maybe my grandchildren will have this option.
There are at least two options that Alcor offers. One is whole body suspension, where the entire body is frozen. That's a minimum of $120,000, most of which is actually invested so that the patient can be cared for an indefinite period of time. We also have another option called neurosuspension, where only the person's head is frozen, or very occasionally the person's brain. And the reasoning behind this is who we are is in our brain.
Now, are you planning on undergoing full body suspension?
I don't know. I probably will have a brain neural. I've left my body kind of drift. I look like Gandhi now. The full body, it costs a lot more, and I don't want to be in a position where my grandchildren are not having money to go to school because they get granddad is up there with his whole body being pickled. I mean, that's not dignified, so I think I'll probably go with the brain.
Dr. Timothy Leary has always led an unconventional life, and his views on dying are no less controversial.
I'm not afraid of dying. In fact, I'm looking forward because there's a process. When your heart stops and your brain stops, there's a period of 2 to 15 minutes. This is the unknown territory. What happens when your brain is up there with 120 billion neurons slapping around without the bothering of the body and all that? The Buddhists and the Hindus have said for centuries the dying process is something that should be studied and to decide how and when.
While cryonics offers us hope, the scientific feasibility is not so simple.
We don't want to have people that look like us in the future. We want to have us there. We do know already that we can freeze sperm and corneas and heart valves and skin and many other human organs, including frozen embryos, fertilized embryos for in vitro fertilization. And these work just fine at that temperature. So at least there's a proof of principle there. We don't know yet how memories are formed in the brain. So we cannot go in and freeze a brain, thought, and examine it and see if the memories are still there. Even in very elementary animals, we can't do that. That should be solved in the next 10 years, though. Scientists are getting very close to understanding that. And then we can really begin to make progress because we can know where the identity of that person is.
That is the billion-dollar question. You see, no one's ever talked about before preserving your memories. I have over 1,000 cardboard cartons, which have every piece of paper that has any personal reference to me. There are about 10 people now working on my archives. These are my memories. And once they get on the computer, you see, then you can order them and you can punch up what happened in July 4th. When I come back, It's going to be fascinating. They're going to have to, it's a very delicate, you can imagine. They'll pull me out of the frosty freeze and they'll thaw me out. And I'll probably be looking at the 3 doctors with clipboards, right? I hope not, but I've got it so set up that my memories will be there and I can retrace my life. It's going to be on a computer.
So do you think you'll retain your same personality?
My personality is, I am an adventurous philosopher. I'm a dissonant philosopher. It's an ancient tradition, Socrates all the way up. I hope that I will maintain the attitude of curiosity and a trusted belief in human nature, and above all, humanism, to empower the individual, to do it yourself with your friends. I hope I keep that. And I'll have instruction. If I come back a Republican, turn me back off, okay? Plug in. Turn on, tune in, and plug in or something.
Eric Drexler, in his book Engines of Creation, discusses how future development of nanotechnology can reverse the severe cellular damage caused by low-temperature freezing.
We think that a lot of repair in the future may be done by using nanotechnology, which is the next step smaller than microtechnology. It means building machines at molecular size, which could actually go inside cells and do repairs, much like the machines inside our cells already do, but these will be programmed to do more things.
Okay, will you show me the procedure? If I came in here, what would happen to me?
As soon as a patient has been declared dead, they're placed inside this mobile rescue cart. We pack them in ice, add water, start circulating it to cool the patient as quickly as possible. We also add a number of different medications to protect the brain, and to circulate these medications, we use this heart-lung resuscitator, which is basically a mechanical CPR machine, and this keeps the blood flowing and gets the medications to the brain. Once we're back here in Scottsdale with the patient, we place the patient on the operating table, still packed in ice, we want to keep it very cold, and we do heart bypass surgery to connect the patient's circulatory system to this set of pumps. This is a bypass machine just like used in regular hospitals. The object here is to replace up to 70% of the water in the patient's body with a chemical called glycerol, same thing as glycerin. The nice thing about glycerol is when it freezes, it does not expand like water does, and it tends not to form crystals. It vitrifies like window glass. So this protects the patient's cells from most of the freezing damage that would otherwise occur.
In this tank, the patient will be cooled down to the temperature of dry ice. The patient, wrapped in plastic, will be lowered into this oil. This oil is made of silicone. It will be pre-cooled to about 10 degrees below freezing. Once the patient is at dry ice temperature, minus 110, we pull the patient out, wrap them in a sleeping bag for padding, and then strap them into this aluminum pod for physical protection. They're strapped here, head down, and the top is placed on. The pod is lifted up in the air with a hoist, and we slide it into a dewar, a large stainless steel container for the cool down to minus 320 Fahrenheit in liquid nitrogen.
Is there a soul? And does cryonics validate or reject the idea of reincarnation or a divine afterlife?
Now, I don't belong to any religion. I would call myself a high-tech Buddhist or a scientific Buddhist. The Buddhists knew that if you turn off your mind, then you're open to all sorts of visions which come from your brain. I found Buddhism and Confucianism to be very hopeful and humanistic. Now, when they talk about reincarnation, they're talking about reincarnation of the soul. And I'm talking about reincarnation of the brain. I think that most of the very sophisticated Buddhists would approve of what I'm doing. And if they don't, well, I'm not going to worry about it.
Beyond the question of scientific feasibility, cryonics also raises philosophical questions, such as, will society continue to advance? And will future generations want to revive a backward people into an already overpopulated planet?
No, I don't want to come back. Here I am. Oh, God, the world is filled with unwanted children. The last thing we want are more old people spending all these resources when there are hundreds of millions of infants being born, unwanted, unplanned, unprepared for. It raises basic questions about human dignity and the human soul and spirit.
How
would you adapt to a society where your knowledge and skills are basically outdated when you come out of this sleep state?
I love that question. I've been stuck with the situation where my ideas are ahead. And the most dangerous thing to be is 10 or 20 years ahead of your time. 40 years, it looks like, oh yeah, but see, Galileo was busted, and the history of people with really good ideas after they're dead, really. So now, I hope to come back totally bewildered. What a thrill. The last thing in the world I want is to go back to a world like this.
I will have to learn new skills, learn a lot of knowledge about the science of the future, but that doesn't concern me.
The people that run the Cryonics Institutes, they're our kind of people. They're very intelligent, they're imaginative, they're utopian. I think it's the most exciting area of science. And it's so simple. When the time comes, I'll just press the button, stopping all of the life preservation techniques, and it's going to be quite painless. I don't want pain, I don't want helplessness, I don't want to die with indignity. I've tried to live a life of activity, and I don't want to have wheeled around having my diapers changed. Bottom line there.
Obviously, we can't guarantee the future. We can't guarantee this is going to work, but you don't start a project assuming it's going to fail. This might work. The difference between might and won't is infinite.
This is a gamble. I personally would say the chances are 1,000 to 1 or 10,000 to 1 against my coming back. I'm not worried about that. I want to live and die in the best fashion possible. I don't care at all. I'm doing my best to be an explorer for the human race. You learn from my mistakes, and that's what science is all about. I'll probably goof up, and they'll forget to put the plug in. It's all right. People will learn. Plug in. Turn on, tune in, and plug in or something. Ha, ha, ha. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, one last thing. If you really do come back, is there anything you're really anxious to do again?
Well, basic to me now, I think to most human beings, are family. And I'm a great grandfather. I was a grandfather, now I'm a great grandfather. I want to come back and see my children. I'm looking forward to.
That's our show for today. Before closing, a final note. With all the grief and turmoil in our world so graphically exploited, it is indeed a pleasure to recognize and applaud the kindnesses of humanity that still prevail. I'm Patrick McNee. Thanks for joining me on Mysteries, Magic, and Miracles.
Produced in association with the Sci-Fi Channel.